Welcome back. Well, we continue to assess a year of the government of national unity, looking at what it is, what it has delivered for South Africans. We're asking you, do you think service delivery has improved under the GNU? Get in touch with us via WhatsApp 0721105584. And on the side of the screen there, on this side, there you go. We've got our phone numbers as well, so you can give us a call. But let's bring in our panel now. We're joined by SAFTU General Secretary, Mr. Zwelinzima Vavi. We're also joined by SACI President, Advocate Tim Toklulu, as well as the SACP spokesperson, Mr. Mbulelo Mandlana. Gentlemen, a good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. What an important moment, because difficult to, I suppose, look at the data and then have an assessment of what it is that we can say makes GNU work or not work. But I want to hear how it is that you go about making these measurements as political parties like Action SA and BOSA have come out with their scorecards. Advocate Kulu, I think I'll let you go first, right? How it is that you measure whether or not this administration is working, particularly in business.
Good evening, and good evening to my fellow panelists and the viewers. Look, there are two ways that we look at it a year in. We look at it in form and its substance. I think business confidence has generally welcomed the formation of the GNU. If you look at our business confidence index, up to the elections, there was some anxiety about whether we'll have the right political outcome from the elections. And the fact that we've been able to transition and have a government that seemingly brought together different interest groups into one program, that was greatly welcome. So the form was very interesting, and I think you'll see that stability was seen throughout the economy. Obviously, these kinds of things are better measured from a substance point of view, and I think a year in, there's still a lot of real challenges that South Africa is facing. The economy is still not growing at the right levels. Unemployment, as you just heard, now is still very high, and we are still not really sure about whether the members of the GNU are really now in sync in terms of the economic priorities. So where we are now, we have accepted the form, and I think the GNU is the model to go, but the substance is where really we are looking into now, and we've not really gotten to a level of maturity from an economic point of view, and that's what we're looking out for as this GNU progresses.
Yeah. It's interesting because you raise maturity, and in the conversation I just had with the Statistician General, he makes a lot of comparison that go, back to 2008 in some instances, making the point that perhaps it is too early to decipher. But Mr. Vavi, I mean, do you agree with that we're not at a point where the GNU has matured enough for us to look at what it's done, for instance, for labor in South Africa? What does your scorecard and certainly its criteria look like?
Look, let's look at it in this way, Naledi. There was a crisis for black majority before 1994. That crisis have remained, and in some respect, in particular in the economy, has worsened post-1994. There was a deepening crisis of unemployment, poverty, inequality, corruption, which are the main reason that led to the voters deserting the ruling party and deserting the politics prior to the establishment of the government of national unity. And that crisis has deepened post the government of national unity of May to June in 1994. All the talk about inclusive growth, the new dawn has arisen, have delivered worse levels of unemployment, deepening inequalities, collapsing public services, worsening hunger, rising authoritarianism in defense of austerity. Basically, the government of national unity has been a disaster for the working class. And as we pointed out at the time when it was established, that a combination of an ANC that has become neoliberal and a hardcore liberal, very conservative, pro-business Democratic Alliance will spell a disaster for the working class. And indeed, your discussion with the Statistician General Maluleka underpins the worst fears that we have. In terms of unemployment and the economy, for example, we now have 12.7 million people who are unemployed. 80% of those are trapped in what we call long-term structural unemployment. Youth unemployment have climbed 60%, in particular in our townships, in the former Bantustans, and in the informal settlement. 21 million people are trapped in poverty. In fact, 62% of the population lives below the upper bound poverty level of 1,558 rands. There's a food insecurity that is increasing, with about 14 million South Africans skipping a meal every day because they cannot afford to buy either supper or breakfast or lunch. The per capita government spending has declined by 18.3% since 2020, meaning that the standards of living of ordinary people has declined by 18.3%. We're getting much more desperate when it comes to poverty and hunger in our society. Now, that's the overall picture when you talk about economy. You talk about an economy that continues to deindustrialize, an economy that is sitting with around 22% of its capacity idling, even though there is a 1.7 trillion rands that is being hoarded by the moneyed class, that they will not invest in the active sectors of the economy. We're talking about an economy that have lost over 309,000 jobs between 1996 and 2022. And that is basically bleeding every day. General Tires is retrenching, is closing down in Port Elizabeth. SAB is retrenching every year, in and out. So that's the crisis that we will talk about in the main, about what has happened over the past 1 year.
Sure. Mr. Vavi coming with lots of data of his own. Thank you for those contributions. I want to bring in the South African Communist Party as an alliance partner of the African National Congress. You've been quite critical of the formation of this government of national unity. I want to hear what your assessment is, particularly when you look at how in the past year, despite the relationship between the ANC and the Democratic Alliance as part of this government, you have seen policies that have been passed, the likes of the Bella Act, Land Expropriation Act. Is that for you restoring some confidence, and what is your measure of success over the past year?
Good evening to your viewers and to my fellow panelists. I think that there are two things to say about discussing the GNU over the last year that it is now finishing. I think the Communist Party's position is known, that we had stood opposed and critical of the approach that was taken in constituting the GNU. I think that it's been clear that the positions that have been taken in justifying and explaining how the GNU must come about and what it must do and what kind of objectives it must meet has not been aligned to what the alliance historically has conceived to be the proper approach on matters of that historical significance. So we cannot speak about the GNU in this particular instance as though we have been proponents as the Communist Party of how it was constituted and indeed how it has progressed since the time it was promulgated with the different organizations that are part of it. That's the first point. The second point that we've always made also as the Communist Party is that at a strategic level, the political direction that the GNU is following has been problematic, to say the least, because essentially how the GNU is constituted is opposed to the fundamental direction that the Communist Party conceives to be the direction that South Africa must take in transforming and in developing in the post-apartheid era. So therefore, to analyze the GNU over the last year, without understanding it in the context of the 30 years of a South African democratic order, in the same way that Mr. Vav was saying. That would be incorrect.
Yeah.
So what we are seeing in the GNU now, which is, for example, in the public service, the non-filling of funded posts in government, which means the government structure and the public service that is responsible for service delivery is in a process of downsizing. Of course, the government itself will not say that it is downsizing, but the effective relationship of what they are doing and what is the public service and its capacity is that outcome is that the state and the government is downsizing.
Yeah.
So if it is downsizing, it is in line with the standing policy that is continuing, which is the policy of austerity. The policy of austerity exists in an economy that is not growing.
Okay.
The combination of those things tell you that at a larger scale, at a strategic level, the GNU government is proceeding with a framework that has already existed that we have been critical of in different areas as the Communist Party.
You know, there's a lot to look at because there's the fact that this government of national unity, obviously, we're going to reflect on it inside of the country ourselves as different sectors and stakeholders, but you've got the world also looking at it and the confidence that the globe has in South Africa's future, also having an impact on what GNU is able to deliver for its citizens. And we're going to look at how we see challenges there and perhaps even some opportunities with our panel on the other side of this, where we'll also take some of your own input. So do stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching Newsfeed PM, the late edition. It's been a year of the Government of National Unity, and we're asking you this evening, do you think that the Government of National Unity has seen improved service delivery? Taking your calls on 010-594-6010 or your WhatsApps on 072-110-5584. In fact, let's take a look at some of those text messages that have come in. We start with this one. Good evening, everyone. Nothing good has happened since the GNU. Something was formed. Instead, it's worse. Everything has crumbled down because they themselves, the leaders in the GNU, they tell us that they have prevented others who want to do better for people, meaning they like seeing us suffer. GNU, you're the worst thing that ever happened to South Africa. Thank you. This is Anonymous from Durban. Okay. Anonymous, thank you so much for sending in that text. SJ in Polokwane says, the GNU is a failure. Both the ANC and the DA are fighting over whose policies to implement. This has never been about service delivery, but it was position sharing between the ANC and the DA. Interesting. SJ, thank you for that. Huitzi Mudimo Marumo says, good evening. GNU so far is doing a good job in terms of service delivery, and more needs to be done. Okay, more needs to be done. Thank you for that. Kapa Madi says, good evening, Naledi. The GNU has two sides, like a coin, headed and tailed. Creation of jobs and growing the economy has been a total failure. On the other side of the coin, thanks for DA and EFF for saving us, the society, from abnormal tax hikes. I'm just afraid that all the opposition parties will be absorbed by the ruling party. Okay, Kapa Madi, thank you so much for that contribution. I will take more WhatsApps, of course, but I want to start to moving towards what it is that we need to see. And I know that this is a big ask. Many of our text messages saying, well, not too convinced about the past 12 months. But if you were to give us a few boxes to tick, Advocate Xulu, that say over the next 12 months, what is it that this Government of National Unity needs to do? Considering that next year we're going into local government elections, service delivery at local government level, really, really telling of how it impacts our citizens. So the next 12 months, what do they need to get right? How do they tick those boxes?
Yeah, look, you raise a very big point. I think I want to start on your last comment. As business, we see actually 2026 as a risk for the GNU because you know that South African elections are very adversarial, and the same leaders who are in the GNU now are going to put on their campaigning shirts in the new year and start getting trying to get votes from the different constituencies. So the biggest risk facing the GNU, obviously, is the fact that they are going to go through another election now, next year, which has a possibility of splitting them, or leaders of the GNU using their current positions as campaigning tools, and ultimately probably disturbing any momentum that they would have built over this past year. So our position is that now that they've settled down in terms of their political cooperation, this year is going to be very important in terms of them demonstrating fairly and in a way that can be measured publicly, their commitment to the economy. So what are those things that is going to sustain the GNU for the next 4 years beyond the upcoming 2026 elections and obviously the ANC conference in 27? Because those two events can easily disrupt whatever brings them together now. So mainly is the fact about how are we going to agree on what are the main priorities? So, for instance, they talk about economic growth. The ANC has a view on inclusive economic growth. The DA has a different definition of it. So, if that is a priority, we need to be able to thresh out the details about how economic growth and economic activity will look like. We also talk about linking it towards a developmental state, meaning that what are these institutions that we are going to overhaul to make sure that they are pointed towards an economy that we want. For instance, COGTA is managed by a non-ANC minister, and so at that level, that infrastructure of local government that impacts local businesses and citizenry, have you really overhauled and improved those institutions at that level for them to be able to respond to the economic challenges at that level? We also want to make sure that the economic cluster is able to really change the direction of, for instance, the DFIs, for them to be invested in the productive industry, making sure that there's coordination on institutions and the support for small businesses, and to unleash innovation and allow them to access greater markets. So there are certain things that need to be built as institutions that can survive the individuals in the GNU and which are pointed towards an economy that we want. So that when we have the interruptions of local government next year and the ANC conference in 27, you will not have changes that can affect this and meaning that the personalities are become more important than the GNU. So the institutions and the mechanisms must be placed now so that they survive the individuals in the GNU and make sure that we have sustained economic activity for the next 4 years.
Yeah, that's big ones. I want to give Mr. Vavi the last word. So, Mr. Mandlana, you're in about a minute and a half, if you can, your list of what, perhaps even your own alliance partner, but what this GNU needs to get right in the next 12 months before the local government elections.
One, I think that the points that Mr. Tulu is making are much more optimistic about what the GNU is capable of and what it can achieve. We think that structurally the GNU is put in a very compromising position. I think that from the alliance standpoint, it's time for the ANC to rethink how it can go back to the drawing board and rethink strategy, because at this particular point, it does appear that we are going into a very gloomy kind of situation. And lastly, for us, as the Communist Party, we will be going into the local government elections next year in order to play a different role in terms of shaping how the policy and the implementation occurs at the local government level, and indeed try to influence from our position the direction forward. Other than that, I think those points would suffice for us, and we think that the rest can be threshed out in the level of the alliance, hopefully, to undo some of the knots that have developed moving towards the GNU.
The SACP, they're saying in 2026 they're going to take on some of these GNU parties in those local government elections. Mr. Vavi, the boxes that you say need to be ticked, particularly for Labour in the next 12 months, the workforce, a big part of the electorate.
Well, we will say address the crisis in the education system. The leaking, the lack of enough personnel, the vacancies that amount to 23,000, fix the infrastructure, improve the quality in particular, make sure that we can compete with our neighbors and with the rest of the world when it comes to mathematics and science, and or just general competition with even our neighbors. So education is absolutely important to us. Secondly, we'll say fix the healthcare crisis. Introduce the national health insurance without any further delay. Thirdly, we will say address industrialization in the economy. Make sure that we stop the job loss bloodbath in the manufacturing sector, make sure that the 1.7 trillion rands that is investable, that is, however, remaining in the back pockets of the money class, is deployed in the economy, and make sure that we address the issues of electricity supply, stop privatization of ESCOM, and make sure that the public infrastructure is placed on the hands of the state to thrive instead of handing it over to the private sector. Reclaim the economy, and we reject the austerity budgets and the budget cuts. We want a funding of the basic income grant at 1,500. We want nationalization of the mineral wealth and to be placed under the democratic control of workers and communities. We want a developmental state. We want to mobilize for mass support for the progressive programs if they ever emerge, but we also want to mobilize the working class to resist the onslaught of austerity programs and neoliberalism.
Yeah. Gentlemen, I wish we had more time, but I really have appreciated your input as we check in on the state of our country a year into this government of national unity. Thank you so much to Mr. Mbulelo Mandlana, SACP National Spokesperson, Advocate Tim Toxulu, President of the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry, as well as Mr. Vavi Saftu, Secretary General, of course, that's Mr. Zwelinzima Vavi. And that's where we'll wrap up that discussion. But do stay with us here on Newsfeed PM, the late edition. We do have your headlines just after this.